Hi, welcome to Tad's Silversmithing. Today I wanted to show you a pretty versatile pendant project that I've found to be a good seller as well as to be a fun one to make. And there's so many different variations you can do with it that you're always making new and interesting things. So I call it an S pendant. It's got two stones and you can use a lot of different kinds of stones. For this one I'm going to use a couple of pieces of Rhodochrosite, and I hope that you find this enjoyable. If you do, would you hit the like button, as well as maybe subscribe if you think it's a place you'd like to come back and visit again and watch some of my other videos. So with that being said, let's get started on this pendant. So let's get started on the S pendant here today. Here's the two little Rhodochrosites that I picked. First thing I'll do is I'll make a couple of closed back bezels. I'm using 3/16 inch bezel, which I use for most things. It's tall enough for most stones and short enough to where it doesn't take much effort to file it down if I want it to be shorter. So it's easy just to have one size around. Okay. I apologize for the lack of jewelry behind me. It's all packed up right now because we did a show last weekend in Greeley, the Greeley Arts Picnic. So, and I have another show in a couple weeks, so I probably won't even unpack it. Sometimes I grab a pair of tweezers and the end is a little bit messed up, and so it's hard to pick up these little pieces of solder until I file the end all flatter again. See, I didn't heat it very evenly that time, and so the solder jumped off to one side and didn't really seal the two together. So I'm going to do it a second time and get a nicer puddle across the gap. That happens once in a while. Put a bottom on the bezel. when you're doing a little bezel like this, I've seen a lot of people cut those super tiny pieces of solder and put them all the way around the inside to make sure the solder flows all the way around the bottom. But I've found that even a couple of decent sized pieces just tucked up against one side, when the solder flows, as long as you get the piece hot enough, it'll wick all the way along that whole bottom seam, as long as you pull it around with the heat. So see how shiny seam formed all the way around. That is one of the convenient things about solder. When it flows, as long as the entire piece is hot, it'll wick along an entire seam for you if you want it to. So, and I did on this case. So nice clean seam on the bottom. Now I'll just trim off the excess here and then file it down. Now, well, actually, the next thing we're going to do is cut a little more square wire. So, I need a couple of small pieces of square wire. Doesn't have to be super long, not like that. File the end flat, at least one of the ends. Yeah. Flattish. The length on these doesn't matter so much as long as it's more than about 1/8 of an inch, because I'm going to trim it off to the same size so they have a little stem sticking out from each of them. So let's throw a little bit of solder on the pad here. Sit for a minute. Okay, this is another piece of 14 gauge square wire. I'm not sure how long I'm going to make this pendant. The cool thing about these is you can make them pretty big if you want and use bigger stones, or you can make them relatively tiny. It's kind of up to you. The other thing is, for this one I'm using cabochons. I've also made them in the past with bezel set faceted stones, and that looks really nice as well, little garnets or something. Alright, so I'm going to do what you might guess. I'm going to bend this into kind of an S-curve. Based on the title. I don't know that there's a trick to this or anything. It's just kind of eyeballing things as you go. Kind of narrowing down my size a little bit here. I may still cut this a little shorter, I haven't decided yet. What's going to happen is one of these is going to go here, one's going to go here. So I just have to figure out how short to cut them off. That way they're attached by that little thin 14 gauge wire. That's not thin, but and kind of cupped by the shape of the curve there. That kind of gives a nice sort of sinuous shape. And then I'll put I might cut this off a little shorter, and then I'll put a ring and a bail on it. So, but I think, just eyeballing this, thinking about, it's not that much. You can get them pretty close. Just might hold it like that. I like that. That's pretty good. I'm going to make a little mark so I can get them where I wanted them. When I line them up on the soldering pad anyway. Those out of the way. The only issue I've had in the past is forgetting to flatten this piece out, the S piece. Get it nice and flat on the pad so that these meet up nicely. And I'm just going to pick solder where those two are together. That. I think this needs to be a skosh shorter. And that's just a matter of taste. That was an arbitrary decision on my part. I have found that there's many ways to do the same thing, and that's a good thing. And so if you ever run across somebody telling you there's only one way to do things, they're wrong, generally. The good thing is learning how to do things in different ways from different people, because everybody has their own approach, and that's a fun thing. Cylinder or something. I keep a lot of little cylindrical items around on the table. This is just a little piece of brass that I have that's a cylinder, and I use it a lot to make jump rings on. And just wrap a piece of wire around it. Because I oftentimes have a need of jump rings about this size. So there's likely enough solder on there, but I have an extra one in case it doesn't adhere to to the main part of the pendant there. But generally, if there's enough solder on the ring here, there we go. Okay, now I just need to make a little bail for it. I think I'll use a bit of 26 gauge sheet. About an inch long. And I'm going to take, this is 22 gauge sterling wire. I'm going to cut two pieces, slightly longer than this piece of sheet that I cut. I'm making kind of the standard bail that I use for a lot of pendants. If you look here, I'll put a link up here for the video on how to make bails, this kind of bail. I think it's a nice looking bail that is relatively easy to make. So that'll get mounted right on top of that. But to do that, I'm going to pick solder a little bit of small pieces of solder on here so we don't get a lot of spread on the solder by leaning pieces against it. So I'll cut a few little tiny ones. We'll put 4 or 5 on each of these wires. So they're a little smaller than we were using earlier. I was pick soldering those on there to prevent a lot of sloppy mess on here. Pick soldering is a super useful skill, so if you'd like to learn more about that, click on the link up here and watch the video about pick soldering. I think it's a very useful skill. Okay, so let's put these on here. I put 5 little tiny pieces of solder on each of these wires. And then what we'll do is we'll more like that, I think. Okay, I'm just going to trim off the excess on the ends here, these. And then use my shears to trim off the excess sheet here. File off the excess. Alright, to turn this into a bail now, I'm just going to use my bail making pliers here. I'm just going to grab it like that and then bend it around that way. I think since it's a little bit smaller, I'll use the other side here for this part. Kind of make a teardrop shape out of it. Like that. And then line these up a little better. To attach it here, the hard part is getting these two ends to stay together. So you have to actually take the piece, push them like that, they always spring back and leave a gap which solder doesn't like to fill. So if you bend them in the middle a little bit each like that, so it forces the two tops together, that way you can pick solder it and then you can straighten this out later if you want to. So that's what I'll be doing here. So I'm going to grab it in the middle of this side here, bend it sharply inwards. Do the same thing on this side. See, you got to figure out how to do it without the little pendant itself getting in your way, which is always kind of a challenge. But really, you just need to get these two ends pushing together nicely, okay? And then I can set it like this, and then I can just pick solder it there. And this is one of the few times where you don't have to heat the entire piece, because this is a separate piece that I don't want to solder to anything. I want it to be loose and free moving. So I just want this piece hot enough for the solder to flow. I don't really need anything to flow over here, nor do I really want anything to flow over there. So let's see, I got a little solder on the pad. Oops, I'm going to... One of the things I do is I use cold pickle instead of hot pickle, so I usually heat up the piece of metal before I throw it in the pickle, and that works almost as fast as hot pickle. So, all right, it's time to pickle for a while, and then we'll come back and I'll clean it up with a Dremel and polish it, and we'll probably set the stones first and then polish it. But we'll be back in a minute. Okay, it's been a few minutes in the pickle, and I'm going to take a look at it and see how it looks. And I think it looks good enough. So I'm going to take the top of these down just a skosh. I don't like bezels to be quite that tall most of the time. This always surprised me when I first started out, that there was something behind the stones in closed back bezels like this. Sometimes people use sawdust. I use tag board usually, and I usually tell my students to find somebody at work where they work who they don't like, and then to wait until they go home, get into their desk, take all their legal pads, and cut off the backs of all of their legal pads and take it home to use for this, because it works great. That kind of stuff works great for this. So kill two birds with one stone that way. Okay, so I think it's time to take it over to the Dremel and clean it up a little bit, and then polish it, and then I'll bring it back so you can see the final product. And I may throw a few other examples of this that I've done with faceted stones or bigger oval stones or something like that, just so you get an idea what some of the options are. But I think these usually come out pretty nice, and this one is a typical example. So let me get this cleaned up for you. So here's the finished product. I think it turned out pretty nice. You can see that from up there. I'll take a little better picture to put at the end, along with some variations I've done in the past, and hopefully you can give this a try yourself. Okay, that was the S pendant that I make periodically, and I think it came out pretty good. I hope that you find this useful and informative, and if you do, would you please hit the like button, as well as maybe subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So Thanks for watching, and feel free to comment or provide suggestions. I always like suggestions for new videos. Thanks for watching, and happy silversmithing.